Thank you for having me. Today I will be presenting on dengue in the pediatric population. Before I go on to talk about my topic, let's take a look at this case which occurred in one of our major hospitals a few years back. This is an 11-year-old Malay girl with no known comorbids. She presented to the Klinik Kesihatan with 1-day history of fever, vomiting and altered behavior. On assessment, the GCS was 9 and there was tenderness on palpation of the abdomen. Blood investigation results showed NS1 antigen was positive. The impression at the time was dengue hemorrhagic fever with decompensated shock. Initial resuscitation with normal saline boluses was commenced in the KK and she was referred to the pediatric department of the major hospital. Child subsequently arrived at the ED for stabilization. In the emergency department, she was further resuscitated with multiple boluses of crystalloids. Despite the fluid resuscitation, her pulse volume was weak and peripheries were cold. After the initial period of stabilization, she was transferred to the pediatric ICU. Upon arrival to the pediatric ICU, she developed pulseless electrical activity, which was reverted with cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Throughout the PICU admission, child was given a total of almost 1.5 liters of fresh whole blood, 1 cycle of DIVC regime, multiple boluses of crystalloids and colloids, and maximum 3 inotropic supports. Pulse volume and vital signs were slightly better after approximately 7 hours of resuscitation. That night, child developed massive bleeding from the vaginal, Rouse tube, and ET tube. She became asystole the next morning. CPR was commenced and she succumbed at 24 hours of PICU admission. Our final cause of death for this child was dengue shock syndrome. After death, several bloods and CSF were sent and the dengue PCR came back positive for them too. Although it was very unfortunate that we have lost this child, drawing from the experience of managing severe dengue, there were several lessons learned that will become the overview of my topic today. I will talk about severe dengue and how to recognize, intravenous fluid therapy being the mainstay of management, what to do if a child is still in shock but fluid overloaded, and the management of bleeding. As for this child, the urine output was still good till the very end. As we all know, dengue is the most rapidly spreading mosquito-borne viral disease in the world. Incidence is increasing with increasing geographic expansion to the majority of the tropical countries, and it not only affects adults, but it also affects infants and children. It has a wide spectrum of clinical presentation with unpredictable clinical evolution and outcome. Previously classified into undifferentiated fever, dengue fever and dengue hemorrhagic fever and grades 1 to 4, depending on the severity, this new WHO system divides dengue into 2 categories, that is dengue with or without warning signs and severe dengue. Symptoms like intense abdominal pain, persistent vomiting, clinical fluid accumulation, mucosal bleed, lethargy or restlessness, liver enlargement of more than 2 centimeters below the subcostal space, as well as increase in hematocrit with concurrent rapid decrease in platelet count are categorized as the warning signs. Severe plasma leakage leading to shock or fluid accumulation into the third space, leading to respiratory distress, severe bleeding, or severe end organ impairment are all classified into severe dengue. This new classification into levels of severity has a high potential of being of practical use in the clinician's decision as to where and how intensely the patient should be observed and treated, that is triage, which is particularly useful in outbreaks. In more consistent reporting in the national and international surveillance system and as an endpoint measure in dengue vaccine and dengue trials. This chart shows the phases of dengue in relation to symptoms and laboratory changes. Essentially, there are three phases. There is the febrile phase, critical phase, and recovery phase. Febrile phase typically lasts 2 to 7 days, accompanied by facial flushing, skin erythema, generalized body ache and headache. Some children may have sore throat, injected pharynx, and conjunctiva injection. In children, these symptoms are difficult to distinguish from any forms of viral fever. A positive tourniquet cast in this phase increases the probability of dengue. The earliest abnormality in a full blood count is a progressive decrease in total white cell count, which should alert the physician to a high probability of dengue. Dengue virus antigens can be identified for 4 to 5 days after the onset of illness in the serum, plasma, circulating blood cells or other tissues, and therefore the use of NS1 antigen for detection of dengue fever in the acute phase. Potentially, child may go into dehydration due to decreased oral intake, vomiting, and increased metabolic state. Febrile phase due to high fever. Rarely, they would have severe hemorrhage. However, monitoring of warning signs prompt early recognition of the critical phase. Critical phase typically lasts 24 to 48 hours around the time of defervescence when the temperature drops to less than 38 degrees. This is accompanied by progressive fall in white cell count, fall in platelet count, and rise in hematocrit, indicative of plasma leakage. This results in varying degrees of plasma leakage leading to pleural effusion and ascites, and also varying degrees of bleeding. When bleeding occurs, it is almost always associated with profound shock, and in combination of thrombocytopenia, hypoxia, and acidosis would lead to metabolic derangements. This can lead to multiple organ failure, severe DIVC, and even death. During this stage, the serology starts to rise and the response to infection may vary according to patient's clinical status. IgG may start to appear after 3 to 5 days of the acute illness. IgM will be detected at the end of the first week and may be detected for life. Therefore, IgG and IgM ratios are commonly used to determine primary or secondary dengue infection. Recovery phase is also known as the resorption phase. Typically lasts 2 to 4 days. During this phase, there is resolution of plasma leakage and bleeding, stabilization of vital signs, and reabsorption of accumulated fluids, including the plasma leakage and administered intravascular fluids. Hematocrit may start to fall and stabilize due to the dilution effect, and the white cell count and platelet may start to rise. Some patients might experience excessive fluid overload leading to pleural effusion and pulmonary edema due to the excessive administration of fluid during the recovery phase. Generally, around 1/3 of the people infected by dengue are symptomatic. The majority of dengue cases are mild. Severe cases are mostly related to two well-known pathophysiologic hallmarks, that is plasma leakage and bleeding. Of these, majority recover with a small mortality rate of less than 5%. Therefore, maintaining a high level of suspicion in the early stage of illness using clinical and laboratory findings and prevention of progression to the more severe manifestations have been important components of the management strategy. It is also important to consider that nowadays, a proportion of dengue infections in children may be atypical. Some may present with symptoms that look like encephalitis, like what happened to this child, whereas some may present as myocarditis, liver impairment, and renal impairment that later diagnosis of dengue is made. This algorithm illustrates the dengue active management pathway for pediatrics. Children can present anywhere to the ED, KK, or any non-leading hospitals. Based on the clinical evaluation, if dengue is suspected, Bloods for dengue will be taken and treatment will be started on site as per our dengue CPG. Subsequently, referral may be made to our pediatric team with details of the child and management that have been done so far. All children who are NS1 antigen or serology positive will be admitted to the ward regardless of clinical status, and public health will be notified. If NS1 antigen or dengue serology comes back negative, workup for other causes will be done. Clinical evaluation of children involves 4 steps: history taking, physical examination, investigations, and diagnosis made according to the disease phase and severity, that is, with or without warning signs, or whether the child is in shock, leading to plasma leakage, bleeding, or end organ involvement. A patient's history should include date of onset of fever. The date is preferable to the number of days of fever. Other symptoms and severity like headache, muscle pain, bone pain, pain behind the eyes, swollen glands, and rashes. It is important to ask these 3 golden questions. That is, the oral fluid intake, to quantify and types of fluid intake for the previous 24 hours. Urine output, quantify in terms of frequency and estimated volume for the last 24 hours and time of most recent voiding. Types of activities performed during this illness, for example, can the patient go to school, etc. These questions, though not specific to dengue, give a good indication of patient's hydration status and how well the patient copes with his illness. Other fluid losses, such as vomiting or diarrhea. Remember, a child who does not drink will not vomit. Presence of warning signs, particularly after the first 72 hours of fever, persistent abdominal tenderness or pain, persistent vomiting, mucosal bleed, lethargy, or restlessness. There are 8 parameters to be assessed to determine the hemodynamic status of the child. Mental status, by assessing the AVPU, whether the child is alert, responds to voice, to pain, or unresponsive, or the GCS, which indicates brain perfusion. Blood pressure, which signifies cardiac output, in which a low blood pressure or a normal systolic blood pressure but rising diastolic blood pressure causing narrow pulse pressure of less than 20 mm mercury signifies shock. The most important assessment to learn today is the assessment of peripheral perfusion. This is known as a 30-second magic touch, done by holding the patient's hand, assessing the color, capillary refill time, temperature of the extremities, pulse volume, and pulse rate, also known as the CCTVR. And lastly, whether the child is tachypneic or having acidotic breathing, which indicate their respiratory compensation for shock. Knowing the vital signs is an important in patient care. They determine which management pathway to follow, provide critical information needed to make life-saving decisions, and confirm whether the treatment is effective. As a general rule, the heart rate and respiratory rate decreases with age. Normal blood pressure varies with age, gender, and height. However, for pediatric resuscitation, it is important to know the lowest systolic blood pressure in each age group range, as any values below this will require emergency management. Difference between the systolic and diastolic pressure of less than 20 indicates dengue shock syndrome. Just to recap, what is sensitivity and specificity? Sensitivity is the ability of the test to show positive in those who have the disease, whereas the specificity is the ability of the test to show negative in those who do not have the disease. So what is the acceptable sensitivity and specificity? Generally speaking, a test of around 90% would be considered to have a good diagnostic performance. So let's look at the Tourniquet test. Tourniquet test, also known as Hess test, is simply a test that determines capillary fragility and is the cheapest and fastest way to determine patients' bleeding tendency in endemic countries that lack laboratory tests like the NS1 antigen and the serology. The test is performed by inflating a blood pressure cuff on the upper arm midway between the diastolic and systolic blood pressure for 5 minutes. The tests are result considered to be positive if more than 10 particles per square inch are observed on the skin in the area that was under pressure. Although the conventional Tourniquet test adds little diagnostic value, in contrast, among Malaysian children, it has a high sensitivity and low specificity. Therefore, a positive test increases the probability of a child having the dengue infection. However, if the test is negative, it does not rule out dengue. Normal hematocrit values for age are also important to know in the management of dengue. This is because any values that rise or fall less than 20% from the baseline in the presence of hemodynamic instability signify either plasma leakage or bleeding, which require further resuscitation. Next, we will talk about fluids, which is a cornerstone of dengue management. When it comes to fluid management, one will usually ask, who should have the IV fluid? What types of IV fluid? How fast and how much to run the IV fluids? When to stop the IV fluids? As the clinical cause of dengue is variable, there are different challenges of fluid management at each stage. If a child is in febrile phase, the goal of management is to treat the dehydration. Majority of these children will be able to take orally, and an IV fluid is reserved for those who are unable to. During the critical stage, there is an increase in capillary permeability, and shock can result if a large volume of plasma is lost through leakage. The recommended regime is immediate and rapid replacement of plasma losses, followed by continued replacement of further plasma losses to maintain effective circulation for 24 to 48 hours. If large amounts of fluids are required, these should be reduced gradually as plasma leakage decreases in order to prevent hypervolemia and excess in plasma volume, which can cause edema, respiratory distress, or congestive cardiac failure during the recovery stage. Pediatric patients who are relatively stable with dengue fever are admitted to the general pediatric ward for observation. An indwelling intravenous cannula is inserted in all patients. Stable patients are encouraged oral fluids. Parents are taught on what types of oral fluids and how much of fluids to give per day based on the Holiday Segar formula that we calculate. As a general rule, we calculate the total volume of fluid requirement for a day and divide into 3 shifts, that is the morning shift, afternoon shift, and night shift. Then we will instruct the parents to give the estimated amount based on what we have calculated for each shift. So at each time the child drinks or passes urine, parents will be asked to record the fluid intake and the urine output. The blood pressure, pulse rate, and respiratory rate are observed regularly with serial monitoring of the hematocrit count. Patients who are unable to take orally and patients with evidence of plasma leakage are given intravenous fluids. figure shows the two major water compartments in the human body and demonstrates where hypotonic and isotonic intravenous crystalloid fluids distribute within these compartments. For clinical purposes, total body water is distributed into two compartments, the intracellular fluid compartment and the extracellular compartment. Within the extracellular fluid compartment, there are two compartments, the interstitial fluid compartment, or fluid surrounding the cells, and the intravascular fluid compartment, or the plasma. In dengue patients with increased vascular permeability, plasma leaks from intravascular compartment to the interstitial fluid. We need to give dengue children fluids that contain the same amount of electrolytes as the plasma, such as isotonic crystalloids or solutions that are more concentrated than plasma, for example, a colloid, to restore the plasma volume while minimizing fluid overload. The goal is to get as much intravenous fluid to stay in the vascular space as possible to minimize the risk of fluid overload. For example, 1 liter of 0.9% normal saline results in 250 cc in the vascular space, whereas 1 liter of half normal saline, only 83 cc will go to the vascular space. Crystalloids are aqueous solutions of mineral salts or other water-soluble molecules. The most commonly used crystalloid is 0.9% or normal saline, an isotonic solution with an osmolarity of 292 milliosmol per liter that has higher sodium and chloride levels than normal plasma. Normal saline is a suitable option for initial fluid resuscitation, but repeated large volumes of 0.9% saline may lead to hyperchloremic acidosis and decreased blood pH owing to excessive chloride levels. Therefore, if serum chloride begins to exceed the normal range, other alternatives such as ringer lactate may be preferable. Ringer lactate has lower sodium and chloride contents than 0.9% saline and an osmolarity of 274 milliosmol per liter. It should be avoided, however, in individuals with liver failure as they have a reduced ability to metabolize lactate. Majority of patients with dengue shock syndrome have mild to moderate shock and will respond well to conventional treatment with crystalloids. A small minority with more serious disease may require more aggressive management with colloids. Given from the outset of hypotensive shock or after 20 to 30 ml per kg of crystalloids administration, colloids are larger molecules and can expand the intravascular volume in excess of the actual volume administered, and so may be beneficial for rapid fluid delivery in emergency resuscitation. Furthermore, colloid molecules may show increased efficacy since they increase plasma oncotic pressure by drawing fluid back into the capillary from the interstitial space. The most common types of colloid used for plasma volume support are gelatin or gelafandine, dextran, and starch-based solutions. Besides staying longer in the circulation, colloids have been shown to restore the cardiac index and reduce the level of hematocrit faster than crystalloids in dengue patients with intractable shock. One of the greatest concerns regarding colloid use is the impact on coagulation. Dextrans theoretically bind to 1 milligram factor or factor VIII complex and impair coagulation. However, this has not been observed to be of clinical significance in fluid resuscitation of dengue shock patients. Gelatin has lesser effect on coagulation but the highest risk of allergic reaction. Care must be exercised in storing colloid solutions, particularly in warmer climates, since dextrans and gelatins are very sensitive to temperatures exceeding 20 to 30 degrees, which has caused degradation into smaller molecules. In clinical terms, This would decrease the solution's intravascular volume effect and increase their renal elimination. The goal is to get as much intravenous fluid to stay in the vascular space as much as possible to improve the CT-TVR and end organ perfusion. This recommended regimen is immediate and rapid replacement of the plasma losses, followed by continued replacement of further plasma losses to maintain effective circulation for 24 to 48 hours. For compensated shock, start with isotonic crystalloids of 10 to 20 ml per kg over 1 hour. For hypotensive shock, crystalloids or colloids may be used, and it is given as 20 ml per kg for a shorter duration over 15 to 30 minutes. Once the shock is corrected, reduce the IV infusion rate in a stepwise manner whenever possible. For overweight or obese patients, the ideal body weight should be used for calculating fluid infusion rates. So, for example, this child is actually 80 kg for the age of 11 years old. So, we will take the corresponding height centile to get the ideal body weight. So, a full blood count and hematocrit as well as group and cross match should be done for all shock patients before any fluid resuscitation. For compensated shock, following the bolus replacement of fluids, reassess the child to determine if there is improvement by assessing the CT-TVR and the urine output. If patient improves, fluids can be reduced further and monitor hematocrit 4 hourly or more frequent if indicated. If after the first bolus, if patient has not improved, act according to the hematocrit levels. If hematocrit increases, which indicates active plasma leakage, consider bolus fluid administration or increased fluid administration. Colloid is preferable if the patient has already received several boluses of crystalloid. If hematocrit decreases or is lower than baseline, look for severe bleeding, that is, your gastrointestinal hemorrhage or hematoma. If severe bleeding is present, transfuse blood urgently. Give colloid until blood becomes available. If patient improves after the blood transfusion, continue stepwise reduction in intravenous fluid. Note that whenever there is improvement in the perfusion and urine output, fluids should not be stopped immediately. Instead, there should be stepwise reduction of fluids so that there will still be continuous replacement of further plasma losses to maintain effective circulation for at least 24 to 48 hours. The algorithm for hypotensive shock is almost similar to the compensated shock, except that crystalloids or colloids may be used and it is given as 20 ml per kg for a shorter duration over 15 to 30 minutes. Reassess the child after the bolus, assessing the CT-TVR and urine output. If patient improves, fluids can be reduced further and monitor hematocrit 4 hourly or more frequent if indicated. If after the first bolus, if patient has not improved, act according to the hematocrit levels. If hematocrit increases, which indicates active plasma leakage, consider bolus fluid administration or increase the fluid administration. Colloid is preferable if the patient has already received several boluses of crystalloids. If hematocrit decreases or is lower than baseline, look for severe bleeding, that is, your GI hemorrhage or hematoma. If severe bleeding is present, transfuse blood urgently. So, how do you interpret rising or persistently high hematocrit? A rising or persistently high hematocrit in the presence of unstable vital signs indicates active plasma leakage and further fluid replacement is needed. However, if the child is stable hemodynamically Child does not need extra intravenous fluids but will need close monitoring of the hematocrit. This is because hematocrit will start to fall in the next 24 hours as plasma leakage stops. What about interpretation of a decrease in hematocrit? A decrease in hematocrit in the presence of unstable vital signs indicates major bleeding and therefore need for urgent transfusion. However, if the child is stable hemodynamically, it indicates hemodilution or reabsorption of the extravasated fluids. Under these circumstances, IV fluids should be reduced in a stepwise manner or discontinued immediately to avoid pulmonary edema. Mucosal bleed may occur in patients with dengue. If the child remains stable, it should be considered as minor and will resolve during the recovery phase. Blood transfusion is indicated when the child is hemodynamically unstable in the presence of persistent and/or severe overt bleeding, such as the GI bleed or bleeding from vagina, regardless of hematocrit level. A decrease in hematocrit after fluid resuscitation, especially with colloids, hypotensive shock with low or normal hematocrit before fluid resuscitation, refractory shock, or persistent metabolic acidosis. Give 5 to 10 ml per kg of fresh packed cells or 10 to 20 ml per kg of fresh whole blood at an appropriate rate and observe the clinical response. It is important that fresh whole blood or fresh red cells are given. Oxygen delivery at tissue level is optimal with high levels of 2,3-diphosphoglycerate. Stopped blood has lower levels of 2,3-diphosphoglycerate, which impede the oxygen releasing capacity of hemoglobin, resulting in functional tissue hypoxia. A good clinical response includes improving hemodynamic status and acid-base balance. Consider repeating the blood transfusion if there is further blood loss or no appropriate rise in hematocrit after blood transfusion. So what about platelet and FFP transfusion? There is little evidence to support the practice of transfusing platelet concentrates and/or fresh frozen plasma for severe bleeding. This article explains the interrelation between dengue virus infection with thrombocytopenia and coagulation disorders. Thrombocytopenia is actually due to the suppression of bone marrow during the febrile phase of the illness. As the child progresses to defervescence, platelets interact with immune cells and the virus, leading to progressive thrombocytopenia. Therefore, it is being practiced when massive bleeding cannot be managed with just fresh whole blood or fresh packed cells. Platelets and FFP can be given, but caution must be taken as this may exacerbate the fluid overload. Fluid overload with large pleural effusion and ascites is a common complication in severe dengue. Causes of fluid overload are excessive or too rapid intravenous fluids, incorrect use of hypotonic rather than isotonic crystallite solutions, inappropriate use of large volumes of intravenous fluids in patients with unrecognized severe bleeding, inappropriate transfusion of fresh frozen plasma, platelet concentrates, and cryoprecipitates. So what to do if the child is still in the state of shock but already fluid overloaded? Several strategies can be used, but caution not to stop the intravenous fluids. Intravenous fluids can be given at a slower rate. Preferably, use colloids at a slower rate and reduce based on response. Blood transfusion can be given at a slower rate except in cases of severe bleeding. What about inotropic support? At present, there is no clinical trials that support the use of inotropes. However, empiric use of vasopressin, that is dopamine or noradrenaline, in short, the addition of inotropic agents, that is dobutamine or adrenaline, if myocardial depression is present, and also need to preempt the need for renal dialysis. Other adjuvant therapy may be necessary, such as intubation and mechanical ventilation for acute respiratory distress syndrome, steroids and immunoglobulin for secondary hematophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, which is usually transient, dialysis for renal failure, and supportive care for liver and heart failure. Furosemide has been known to improve the oxygenation, especially in children who develop ARDS. Low doses of IV furosemide can be given once the child is out of critical phase and all IV fluids have been stopped. However, one needs to ensure good peripheral perfusion and good uric output that indicates good end-to-end organ perfusion when giving furosemide. Once patient passes urine, we check CCTVR. Patient's breathing should be better after passing out some volume. Criteria for discharge is based on clinical and laboratory criteria. For clinical, there will usually be no fever for 48 hours, improvement in clinical status such as the general well-being, appetite, hemodynamic status, uric output, and not in respiratory distress. For the laboratory aspect, there will be an increased trend of platelet count and stable hematocrit without intravenous fluids. In summary, dengue is a complex and unpredictable disease which also affects infants and children. Severe hemorrhage and plasma leakage are the key features of severe infection. Success can be achieved with interventions given at the appropriate times. Treatment remains supportive with emphasis on recognition of warning signs of severe dengue, hematological monitoring, fluid replacement therapy, and all blood transfusions when required. Thank you.